Good morning. The committee will come to order. I'd like to begin this hearing by stating the Oversight Committee mission statement. We exist to secure two fundamental principles. First, Americans have the right to know that money Washington takes from them is well spent. And second, Americans deserve an efficient, effective government that works for them. Our duty on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee is to protect these rights. Our solemn responsibility is to hold government accountable to taxpayers, because taxpayers have a right to know what they are getting from their government. We will work tirelessly in partnership with citizen watchdogs to deliver the facts to the American people and bring genuine reform to the Federal bureaucracy. This is the mission of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee. I want to welcome everybody here to this hearing, which we have entitled Preventing Stolen Valor, Challenges and Solutions. I'd like to welcome Ranking Member Tierney, members of the subcommittees, members of the audience, and especially Chairman of our full committee, Mr. Issa of California. The National Security Subcommittee has a long history of overseeing matters affecting treatment of our troops and veterans. Under both Republican and Democratic leadership, members have worked side by side to help ensure the best care for our wounded warriors. Last May, we addressed the lengthy transition of wounded warriors from the Department of Defense to the Department of Veterans Affairs. Today, we will address the impact of those who lie about military service for their own personal gain. We also look at whether the Federal Government has the ability to track, store, and locate personnel records, and to the extent they are accessible. As a nation, we honor those who wear the uniform and defend our freedom. In recognition of their service, we bestow medals and citations. Some are awarded on a routine basis, such as a Good Conduct Medal. Others, such as the Congressional Medal of Honor and the Distinguished Service Cross, are reserved for the most heroic acts of sacrifice. Sadly, there are some who claim awards even when they were not earned. According to the VA's Inspector General, there were 78 arrests from stolen valor investigations between January 1st, 2010 and September 30th of 2011. These arrests generated over $10 million in restitution and roughly $5.4 million in administrative savings and recovery of taxpayer dollars. In some cases, stolen valor has involved renting, in quotes, the military service of legitimate veterans. The purpose of renting is to obtain access to government services and programs reserved for truly disabled servicemen. These actions are despicable and must be prevented. It was recently discovered that a government contractor set up a construction company with a disabled veteran as the figurehead. This company fraudulently obtained $3.4 million in preferential contracts issued by the VA. Last year, I was approached by someone claiming to have earned the Silver Star, a Distinguished Service Cross, and a Purple Heart. Shortly after presenting the medals to him at a town hall meeting, I learned that he may have falsified his paperwork and potentially lied about his awards. My office is not alone. As Mr. Sterner will attest, there are more than a few members of Congress who have been publicly victimized. Unfortunately, this behavior is not a recent phenomenon. Indeed, it has been a problem since our nation's founding. In 1782, General George Washington proclaimed, quote, "Should any who are not entitled these honors have the insolence to assume the badges of them, they shall be severely punished." End quote. As a founding father and war hero, he recognized the importance of protecting the valor. In that same spirit, Congress acted in 2005 to impose fines and imprisonment for those who falsely represent themselves. The Stolen Valor Act, however, is currently under review by the United States Supreme Court in U.S. v. Alvarez. While that case is certainly open for discussion, its merits are not the focus of today's discussion. Rather, we will concentrate on the Federal Government's effort to track, store, and access military records. Do we have the proper systems in place? What portion of the overall data is digitized and searchable? Are the data easily acceptable to those who need to know? Are the Federal Government's efforts cost-effective? Can we do it faster, cheaper, and more efficiently? I hope that our discussion today will answer these questions and bring us closer to finding a solution. Preventing stolen valor is critical to preserving the dignity of the honors bestowed upon our men and women in uniform. We also have a number of people that I want to, let me put it another way. We have people who want to employ those who have served in our military and done so with honor. I worry that those people have no way of verifying whether or not these medals are true. I'm not talking about some guy who's trying to impress some girl in a bar somewhere. I'm talking about somebody who legitimately wants to hire somebody, all things being equal, wants to do it for somebody who has served their nation. And I worry that there is no mechanism to find that out, and that it's convoluted at best. There isn't the coordination that needs to happen, and consequently we have people abusing the system. I like what President Ronald Reagan said, trust but verify. There needs to be a way to go through this verification process, and that, to me, is the heart of what we're trying to do here in this hearing. I look forward to hearing from the panel. I appreciate all of your efforts, your patriotism, your commitment to this issue, and your being here. But now I'd like to recognize the ranking member, the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Tierney, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank to all the members of the panel, this extensive panel, as I see before us here today. The topic of stolen valor is timely and is important. In the past, Congress has acted to defend recipients of military service awards and to punish those who misappropriate the honors and prestige of the awards for their own personal and professional benefit. Stolen Valor Act of 2005 makes it a crime to falsely represent oneself as a service award recipient and provides for jail time up to 1 year, depending on the award falsely claimed. However, the question before us today, I think the Chairman rightly notes, is not whether or not those who commit acts of stolen valor should be exposed and punished. Instead, the question that this subcommittee should be asking is whether and how the Federal Government can do a better job of maintaining and assessing service records to verify awards in order to protect the public, including members of Congress, from this type of fraud. As we assess the scope of this problem of false representations of valor and any proposed solution, I think we should focus on probably 3 key points. First, the awards verification process must be factually accurate. This means that any official response from the Department of Defense must rely on official records, must rely on an examination of the entire record, and that any proposed list or database must be comprehensive. Second, the awards verification process must be responsive. Since the purpose of the system is to help confirm awards of valor to the public, I believe the responses must be timely to limit the possibilities for fraud. Last, the awards verification process must be cost-effective. In this climate of budget cuts and economic insecurity, it is important that any system for confirming military awards provide the most accurate and timely responses at the lowest cost to the taxpayer. To that end, I would just note that the National Personnel Records Center contains 60 million official military personnel records. The approximate cost of responding to a personnel record request, which can involve the reconstruction of the record, is $33 per record. As we look to ways to improve the current system, I suggest we start by looking at the Department of Defense in a decentralized way that they respond to these requests. Although the National Personnel Records Center previously served as the one-stop shop for verifying military personnel records, that doesn't seem to be the case anymore. With the advent of electronic record systems in the 1990s, the service departments began developing their own databases. I think it's instructive that I look out before the panel here this morning and I see 6 people from the services here testifying. We probably would only need 1 if we had any kind of centralization on this. And I think that probably speaks to a lot of issues with our military today, but we do seem to be decentralizing, probably duplicating a lot of activities at considerable expense. So today, each of the service departments has a different relationship with the National Personnel Records Center, which leads to different processes and procedures for verifying records. I'd like to hear each of the witnesses tell me why they think that's the best way to proceed, or if they think we ought to change that and how we might go about changing it so we don't end up with this situation. We have to determine whether or not we could have a more consistent, uniform system that would improve both responsiveness and efficiency. And last, I want to briefly thank Mr. Sterner for his personal contributions. I understand that the database, sir, that you've worked on has assisted law enforcement in stolen valor investigations and even assisted members of the public, and I thank you for that. So thank all of you for your interest in the topic. Thank all of you for testimony here today, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Tierney. We'll now recognize the chairman of our full committee, the gentleman from California, Mr. Issa, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What we're going to do here today, as both the chairman and ranking member pointed out, is going to deal with the accuracy and the efficiency of the records so that, in fact, we have a better and more consistent and easier to access database for confirmation. But as a member of Congress, if I didn't say the name Wes Cooley here, I wouldn't be reminding people that we've had people who either ran for or got elected to Congress who flat lied about their service careers, either exaggerated medals, combat service, or in fact didn't serve at all. That's one of the problems we have, is there's not enough transparency to the entire public for honorable service. At the risk of being inaccurate, I'll carefully say I have 2 honorable discharges and 2 DD-214s. I'll say no more because, in fact, my service was not special. I was not awarded medals for valor. But in fact, it's important that all of us understand that we bestow well-earned special rights, privileges, and places of honor on behalf of those who served honorably. I think this committee has a special obligation. The ranking member in his opening statement included the word efficiency, and this committee certainly wants efficiency. But if it costs $33 or $300 per record to get it right, our choice is get it right or dishonor those who served and gave so much. Just yesterday, I had the honor of meeting with Dwight David Eisenhower's granddaughter, Susan Eisenhower. President Eisenhower, one of our very few five-star generals in history, President of the United States for 8 years, is buried in an $80 coffin with one row of medals by his choice. Those who serve honorably and those who serve at the highest levels and for the longest time and with the greatest valor, all of the above, usually tell less about what they did. They don't feel a need to brag in bars about their service in NAM. They often don't get enough credit for what they've done. So this committee takes a special pride and obligation in making sure that those who don't talk enough and don't exaggerate are honored appropriately, and never again do we find false medals being awarded by members of Congress, false medals being worn by individuals, or in fact people claiming special positions for hire or contracting because of a claimed service which they did not do and they did not earn. So, Mr. Chairman, I think there's no more important hearing we will hold than to make sure we hold accountable those who would lie about their service and bring such a questionable honor on those who do. I have no special right to talk on service. My service was just mediocre by my own statements. I came, I served, I was enlisted, and then I was fortunate enough to get a college education and be commissioned. But I served with an awful lot of great people. Some of them are buried at Arlington. All of them gave a great deal. They hold a special place in my heart. And, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for holding this hearing and for national security, including getting it right for our veterans. I yield back. Thank you, and thank you for your service. And to all those who have served, thank you. That is the heart of this hearing. I'd now like to recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Cummings, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I thank you for calling this hearing today to examine the problem of fraudulent claims of military service awards and decorations. As you know, in 2005, Congress passed the Stolen Valor Act to make it a crime for anyone to falsely claim the receipt of a congressionally authorized medal or decoration. When this legislation was considered in Congress, it passed the House unanimously. Although the statute has since been challenged in court, I think we can all agree that Congress should do everything it can to ensure the integrity of our military awards and decorations. As we consider potential solutions, though, I think it is important to understand the scope of the problem. For example, in his written testimony, Mr. Nurl states that the Department of the Navy has received only 2 requests from law enforcement agencies for verification of military awards since 2008. Similarly, Mr. Herbert, the Director of Officer and Enlisted Personnel Management at the Department of Defense, states in his testimony that, and I quote, limited frequency of such claims helps to inform the way forward, end of quote. So I look forward to hearing from the panelists today about the scope of the problem so that we can ensure that Congress and the Executive respond appropriately. And now I'd like to yield to Mr. Clay the balance of my time.
And I thank the ranking member for yielding. And, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the opportunity to introduce Mr. Levins. And as St. Louis's congressman, I'm proud to represent the National Personnel Records Center. Director Levins and his excellent workforce of National Archives employees perform critically important services. The men and women who have served our country in uniform and as Federal civilian workers count on Mr. Levins and his staff to fulfill more than 25,000 requests for records each year. They do so professionally and properly while upholding the highest traditions and standards of the National Archives. I want to say unequivocally that I believe Archivist David Ferriero has an exceptional leader in Director Levins, and moreover, the Archives employees at NPRC are doing an outstanding job, and I give them my thanks and the thanks to this committee. And, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Does any other member wish to make an opening statement?
Thank you.
Very good. Members will have 7 days to submit opening statements for the record. We'll now recognize our panel. I want to make sure that I get each of your names proper. Hebert, is that Hebert? Mr. Hebert is the Director of Officer and Enlisted Personnel Management in the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness. Colonel Jason Evans is the Adjutant General of the United States Army. Colonel Mostert is the Director of Awards and Decorations for the United States Air Force. Mr. James Nierl is the President of the Board of Decorations and Medals for the Department of Navy. Mr. Scott Levins is the Director for Military Records at the National Personnel Records Center. Mr. Joseph Davis is the Director of Public Affairs for the Veterans of Foreign Wars. And Mr. Doug Sterner is the Curator of the Military Times Hall of Valor. We thank you again for the time and effort that you have all been here. Pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses will be sworn in before they testify. If you'll please rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. You may be seated. Let the record reflect that the witness has answered in the affirmative. In order to allow time for proper discussion, please limit your verbal testimony to less than 5 minutes. We have a rather large panel. We'd like to get to the questioning. We will obviously submit your entire record, entire statement into the record. And if you have additional materials you'd like to add later, please submit those to the committee within 5 days. So we'll now recognize our first witness, and we will now recognize Mr. Hebert for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Chavis, Mr. Tierney, distinguished members of the committee. I am honored to come before you this morning to address concerns regarding the fabrication of military service records and awards by those who fraudulently seek to obtain personal and professional benefit and the mechanisms available to verify such claims. Before I proceed with my formal statement, I would offer to you 2 points. First, I am convinced that everyone in this panel and in this committee are equally committed to the protection of our veterans and our serving members, and equally committed to the recognition of their service, valorous or not. It is that service that makes the nation what it is. And as many of us have served, both in the committee and on this panel, it is our right and our privilege to protect those who follow. That being said, although the Department of Defense is not responsible for prosecuting criminal offenses under the Stolen Valor Act, the military departments do provide verification of claims to military decorations and awards based on requests from the Department of Justice, States Attorneys General, law enforcement agencies, and members of Congress. Each military department does have the authority to prosecute and discipline currently serving members who fraudulently claim military decorations and awards. While even one false claim is too many, the limited frequency of such claims does help to inform the way forward. Regarding the Department's ability to maintain databases to track and access service records, each military service currently maintains digitized official military personnel records, which include the Certificate of Separation or Discharge and documents detailing military decorations and awards conferred. The limitation of these files is that the conversion began in the 1990s and wasn't completed for all services until 2004. Official military personnel records that have not been digitized are maintained in the National Personnel Records Center or the National Archives. To enhance access to these digital files, the Defense Personnel Records Information Retrieval System was launched in 2002, providing a portal through which authorized government agencies may access the military department's official military personnel records. Some of the agencies that currently have access include the Department of Veteran Affairs, Federal Bureau of Investigations, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Labor, and the Federal Aviation Administration. Over the past few years, there has been a significant increase in the use of this system. Last year alone, over 750,000 inquiries were fielded. This system provides fast and efficient means of verifying military decorations and awards with regard to fraudulent claims. However, limitations inherent in such an automated system don't allow us to determine the purpose for which the inquiry was done, whether it was to verify awards or decorations or to verify employment or service, because the scope of the information provided in the system is so broad, it allows law enforcement agencies to verify a broad variety of questions that might come up. While the Defense Personnel Records Information Retrieval System provides access to digital files, each military service, along with the National Personnel Records Center, must individually process requests for verification of military decorations for service members whose records only exist on paper or microfiche. Regardless of the age or type of records being verified, each military department provides priority responses to requests from law enforcement organizations or members of Congress. Naturally, verification of paper or microfiche records is more time-consuming, as these records must be located and manually reviewed to determine decorations and awards conferred. Verification of these records is not always definitive. There was a fire at the National Personnel Records Center in 1973 that destroyed approximately 16 to 18 million Army and Air Force records. Although the military departments received many requests for verifications of military decorations, very few of these requests have been identified as specifically tied to fraudulent awards with regard to the Stolen Valor Act. The Department's report to the Senate House Armed Services Committee on a searchable military valorous decorations database in March 2009 details the issues associated with making this information public. The Department determined that the utility of a publicly accessible database is limited by the need to protect personal privacy and the lack of a means to account for all decorations. The omission of even one individual from this database can inadvertently harm a veteran, the same person that it was designed to protect. The Department concluded that protection of individuals was paramount, therefore has opted to use for tiered levels of review and the government accessible database I have described. While only more recent records benefit from current technology, the alternative would require digital conversion of 60 million service members' personnel records at a substantial cost. Given the limited number of inquiries the Department receives each year, allowing records professionals to verify older records on a case-by-case basis has proven to be an effective process. That's not to say there's not room for improvement. The Department recognizes every system that we have has room for improvement with regard to efficiency and effectiveness. Each witness here today will further address their respective organizations' decorations and awards process. I thank you for the opportunity to come before you today and for your continued support of our military members and their families.
Thank you. Colonel Evans.
Chairman Chavez, Representative Tierney, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for providing me the opportunity to appear before you on behalf of America's Army. It is a privilege to be here today to present our system of military awards to you. The Awards and Decoration Branch is the centerpiece of the Army's Military Awards Program. Our award system recognizes distinguishing acts of valor and bravery for our soldiers, and when needed, supports the internal and external agencies with verifying cases of possible fraudulent awards. There is no greater act of heroism than serving this great country in uniform, and there should never be a time when a member's service is compromised by those who misrepresent their service to this great nation and fraudulently receive awards. In that, we make it a priority to support agencies who request our support and expertise to verify awards for those suspected of and charged with making fraudulent award claims. The Army uses multiple databases and a systemic process to protect the integrity of our award system and to verify awards information on its soldiers past and present. The Army verifies the soldier's award record through internal personnel databases, official military record files, microfiche, other historical record cache resources which require research and analysis. At the request of internal and external agencies, we use all those systems and have been able to support or deny suspected fraudulent award claims. Upon receipt of a request, we make it a priority to conduct thorough research and analysis and provide timely feedback to the requesting agency. A soldier's personnel service record impacts the timeliness of our feedback. In many cases, for a soldier who served during a past conflict, we request the soldier's personnel records from the National Personnel Records Center to assist in the process of validating approved awards. When validating award requests, the Army takes great care not to deny valor awards solely based on the omission of records. Record losses stem from the 1973 fire at the National Personnel Records Center. Additionally, errors may have been made in recording the award, or records have been lost entirely through no fault of the soldier. The Army will exhaust all available resources before stating we cannot confirm an individual was not awarded a Valor Award. This process may take 6 months or more. We routinely assist the Inspector General, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, judge advocates, as well as the Army Board of Correction of Military Records, Veterans Affairs, congressional members, and Army units. Over the past 3 years, we are aware of less than 20 fraudulent cases. In each case, we have assisted in providing valuable information to these organizations, which prompted the need for further investigation or prosecution by the appropriate authorities. While service organizations play a critical role in assisting veterans to receive retroactive awards, we are aware there are illegitimate online services which claim to provide Army awards and decorations. However, those illegitimate online services are not supported by the Army as a reliable resource to validate award information and issue reproduction certificates. The Army award system contains numerous checks and balances which include endorsements from various levels of the chain of command and human resources elements for ensuring the appropriate level of recognition is warranted for each soldier. We will continue supporting all legitimate agencies to protect the integrity of the military awards program for our men and women who honorably serve this nation. Once again, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. Colonel.
Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Tierney, distinguished members of the subcommittee, I thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today representing the men and women of the United States Air Force. We appreciate your leadership and continued support of our airmen and their families. We have many airmen who go above and beyond the call of duty while performing their duties. We recognize these individuals with military awards and decorations. By their unwavering actions, they have earned the right to wear these awards and decorations and to wear them proudly. Unfortunately, there are occasions where current or former military members, or those who claim to be former military members, fraudulently assert to have earned awards for valor. This action has the potential to degrade the value of our military recognition program. The Air Force takes this matter very seriously. All awards and decorations earned by an airman are included in and can be verified through their official military personnel record. When our department receives requests for award verification from Congress through the Secretary of the Air Force Legislative Liaison Office or from law enforcement agencies, our Air Force Personnel Center conducts research and provides validated results. If the person being researched is an active duty airman or one who separated from the service during or after October of 2004, we can quickly ascertain the purported recognition by retrieving their electronic record in our military personnel database system, which began operation in October of 2004. However, if the person is not on active duty or separated from the service prior to October of 2004, we must send a record request to the National Personnel Records Center in St. Louis, Missouri, a process which takes on average about 60 days to complete. The Air Force receives a few hundred award verification requests per year. We verify those that are valid, constituting about 95% of the requests, and identify those that are either lacking documentation or unconfirmed, about 4.9%, or suspected to be fraudulent, about 0.1%, constituting 2 cases over the past 2 years. We take fraudulent matters very seriously. As an example, in early 2011, we expedited a personnel records review for an investigator from the Department of Treasury. He sought to validate an employee's claim of being a Purple Heart recipient. We were able to provide information in a few days, enabling the Department of Treasury to address the issue from an informed position. Mr. Chairman, to conclude, I again thank you and the committee for the opportunity to be here today to discuss this serious matter. We look forward to working with the committee and answering your questions.
Thank you. Mr. Nero.
Good morning, Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Tierney, and other distinguished members of the subcommittee. I'm honored to be able to testify this morning about the awards process within the Department of the Navy and the procedures we use to verify awards received by members of the Naval Service. The integrity of the process by which our valor declarations and medals are approved is vital to maintaining the high esteem in which these awards are held. Fundamental aspects of our award process are time-tested and have not changed significantly since World War II. Recommendation for an award for a Valor Medal may be initiated by a commissioned officer who has knowledge of the facts, who is senior to the individual being recommended. No person may recommend himself or herself for an award. The recommending officer completes and signs the award form, which includes a narrative and is supported by the statements of eyewitnesses. The award recommendation is then forwarded up the chain of command to the person who has the authority to approve or disapprove the award. There are also well-defined and long-standing procedures in existence for the recommendation of veterans of past conflicts for Valor Awards and for the reconsideration and upgrade of previously awarded decorations. Although the basic process has not changed significantly since World War II, the technology in use within the award system has evolved. From World War II through post-Vietnam, award recommendations were processed and recorded as hard copy documents. Since 2003, the Marine Corps is utilizing a web-based paperless system, although the Navy continues to use paper recommendations and approvals of awards. The Navy does maintain a web-based searchable database that contains data for awards that go back to 1963. Our awards branch staffs have ready access to various other awards records covering World War II and later, but none of these collections is exhaustive. For all periods of service during and after World War II, the most authoritative source for verification of awards is the individual service member's official military personnel file. OMPS for Navy and Marine Corps personnel in active service and those who left the service in the late 90s are in electronic digital form maintained by the personnel branches of the services. OMPS from earlier periods are maintained by the National Personnel Records Center in St. Louis. The Department of Navy gives priority support to law enforcement agencies that are investigating fraudulent award claims. Fewer than 5 of these requests from law enforcement agencies for verification of military awards have been received at the Department headquarters since 2008. During that same period, a small number of verification requests were also received from members of Congress, the media, and Department of Veterans Affairs. However, it is important to note that law enforcement agencies and other Federal agencies do have access to recent OMPFs through the Defense Personnel Records Information Retrieval System, DPRIS, and it is impossible to know how many of those accesses through that system were used to investigate fraudulent claims. When responding to an award verification request, we are careful to caution that our inability to locate an official record of a particular award is not in and of itself proof that this award was never made is not valid. It is possible the person claiming to have received the award has in his or her possession some authentic documentation of that award. It is also possible an error was made in the recording of the award or the pertinent record was destroyed or cannot be located. When no official record of an award can be found, the Department of the Navy is bound by the presumption of regularity and must conclude that the award in question was never approved. And clear, authentic evidence must be presented to overcome this presumption. Again, I thank you for the opportunity to appear before the committee.
Thank you. Mr. Levins, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
I'd like to thank Congressman Clay for the kind introduction. Good morning, Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Tierney, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for calling this hearing and for your attention to issues surrounding the management of records which document the service of our nation's veterans. I am proud to represent the staff of the National Personnel Records Center, many of whom are veterans themselves. I'm pleased to appear before you today to discuss the work that the Center does to serve those who have served. The National Personnel Records Center is an office of the National Archives and Records Administration. Located in multiple facilities in the St. Louis area, the center stores and services over 4 million cubic feet of military and civilian personnel, medical, and related records dating back to the Spanish-American War. In the year 2000, Congress provided NARA with a revolving fund that allows NARA's Record Center program, including the National Personnel Records Center, to function on a cost-reimbursable basis. Accordingly, NPRC no longer receives annual appropriations for its Record Center program and instead charges each agency the full cost of servicing their records. In the mid-1950s, the Department of Defense constructed the Military Personnel Records Center in Overland, Missouri. In 1960, the center's functions were consolidated and transferred to the General Services Administration to be managed by NARA's predecessor agency, the National Archives and Records Service, as a single program, leveraging economies of scale to improve efficiency and offering a central point of access for military service records. When the Military Personnel Records Center was constructed in the 1950s, it was not equipped with a fire suppression system. In 1973, a massive fire at the center destroyed 16 to 18 million records documenting the military service of Army and Air Force veterans who separated between 1912 and 1964. Though the fire occurred almost 40 years ago, the center continues to service approximately 200,000 requests per year, which pertain to records lost in that fire. Though the center is normally able to reconstruct basic service data, it is often impossible to reconstruct complete records of awards and decorations. Today, NPRC holds approximately 60 million official military personnel files. Its holdings also include service treatment records, clinical records from military medical treatment facilities, auxiliary records such as pay vouchers and service name indexes, and organizational records such as morning reports and unit rosters. NPRC stores these records in both textual and micrographic formats. NPRC's military records facility receives between 4,000 and 5,000 correspondence requests each day from veterans, their next of kin, federal agencies, members of Congress, the media, and other stakeholders. It responds to 74% of these requests in 10 business days or less. Nearly half of these requests come from veterans seeking a copy of their separation statement because they need it to pursue a benefit. The center responds to 93% of these types of requests in 10 business days or less. Regarding requests for military awards and decorations, NPRC does not issue service medals. However, for cases involving Air Force and Army veterans, the NPRC staff review the records, find the awards listed, send a response back to the veteran listing the awards, and initiate an order with the Army or Air Force to have the actual awards mailed to the veteran. For veterans of the Navy, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard, the requests are referred for action to a Navy office which is co-located in the same facility. During fiscal year 2011, NPRC responded to approximately 67,000 requests for military awards and decorations, which represented 6% of its overall correspondence volume. NPRC also responds to Freedom of Information Act requests for records of all the military services. During fiscal year 2011, NPRC responded to over 16,000 FOIA requests and responded to 98% of them in 20 days or less. Some of these requests come from interested third parties wishing to verify a veteran's awards and decorations, and we are able to release that information about awards and decorations earned while in service. Despite the original idea in 1960 for the NPRC to serve as a central repository for information needed to verify rights and benefits for veterans, beginning in the early 1990s, the Military Service Department stopped retiring medical records, now called service treatment records, to NPRC and instead retire them directly to the VA. As a result, the NPRC does not have direct access to modern service treatment records. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, with the exception of the Coast Guard, the military service departments also stopped retiring official military personnel files to NPRC, instead retaining them in-house in electronic formats. The military services use their electronic personnel record systems to respond to routine correspondence requests from veterans and other stakeholders. With the exception of the Department of the Army, the NPRC refers correspondence requests for these records to the appropriate military department for servicing. In 2007, the Department of the Army entered into an agreement with NARA to allow NPRC to access its electronic personnel records for the purpose of responding to routine correspondence requests. The Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps continue to service their own personnel records and respond to routine correspondence requests from veterans and other stakeholders. NARA is eager to work with the subcommittee and other stakeholders to explore opportunities to better serve our nation's veterans. We invite the subcommittee members to visit NPRC. We welcome suggestions to improve service and efficiency, and we again extend our sincere thanks to the subcommittee for expressing such great interest in the services provided by NPRC.
Thank you. Mr. Davis, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, sir. Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Tierney, members of the committee, thank you on behalf of the 2 million members of the Veterans of Foreign Wars for having this hearing today. One of the greatest threats to small unit morale is a barracks thief. It is an egregious violation of personal space, property, and trust. Plus, it sows seeds of suspicion among those who must depend upon each other to fight, win, and survive our nation's battles. Upon discovery, the thief is dealt with severely, principally under charges of Article 122 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. America's wars of past and present have produced thousands of true heroes who have properly been recognized for their selfless service and bravery, and untold more whose actions died with them in battle. For those few who survived and to the memories of those who did not, the Stolen Valor Act of 2005 was enacted to protect them against barracks thieves who would seek public acclaim and personal gain during an era of tremendous public respect for the military. The VFW is the lead co-signer of the amicus brief to ask the U.S. Supreme Court to uphold the Stolen Valor Act. This law must be upheld, and all punishments must be swift, severe, and public to the maximum extent to deter others from stealing other people's value. The constitutional issue of the Supreme Court is not the purpose of this hearing, but we do ask the committee to use this opportunity to require the military services to better document military awards for verification purposes. All military declarations are government issued, yet there is no government-run searchable military database that catalogs the awards. Instead, this function has been ceded almost entirely to non-government entities that may or may not have access to complete lists, if such lists exist at all. The Civilian Enterprise Military Hall of Valor is the unofficial records keeper, and its founders and chief researchers, Doug and Pam Sterner of Alexandria, Virginia, are recognized experts for verifying recipients of the military's top medals for valor and for helping to expose frauds. Hall of Valor lists almost 100,000 medal recipients, to include all the Medal of Honor recipients and virtually all the Distinguished Service Cross, Navy Cross, and Air Force Cross recipients. It also lists over 24,400 recipients of the Silver Star, which is our nation's third highest medal for valor. A civilian entity with limited resources, limited manpower, and budget has accomplished all this through open source documents, FOIA requests, and most of all, perseverance. And Hall of Valor has done it to an extremely high degree of accuracy. The question this begs is, why hasn't the military taken the initiative to properly document for posterity the medals they issue? Preserving military heritage demands an electronic record keeping of more than just who was the umpteenth commander of the military service, a Navy ship, or an Army division. It demands an official and verifiable record of battles and maneuvers and of the units involved. More so, it demands that those servicemen and women who excelled under fire be recognized and entered into the permanent history of that service. A searchable database is the only responsible way to properly document the medals the military issues, and would also help the Department of Veterans Affairs in their mission to provide health care, disability compensation, and burial benefits to our eligible veterans. The military must take better ownership of their personal record keeping and do everything possible to eliminate the holes in personnel service records, such as when a medal is not processed or approved until long after the service member has separated or retired or in some cases died. A co-worker here in the VFW Washington office learned he was awarded a Bronze Star for meritorious service in Iraq for his service there in 2004. He has a copy of his medal certificate and an orders number, but for almost 7 years has been unsuccessful in tracking down the original documents to correct his DD-214. A reply earlier this month from Army Human Resources Command basically said, "Our records on you might be a little incomplete." Mr. Chairman, if this 30-year-old Iraqi veteran, who is immersed in the ways of the government bureaucracy because of his position here in Washington, D.C., if he can't get his records corrected, how difficult must it be for hundreds of thousands of other veterans from other services and other generations? It's virtually impossible. Computers have made things faster, but computers have not made the military personnel system any better. Perhaps it's because the military focuses too much on recruiting and retention and not on the high quality of people they return to civilian society after 4 or 40 years of faithful service. Regardless, there is absolutely no excuse in the year 2012 that the entire military personnel system cannot immediately find and correct errors and omissions on military service records. Mr. Chairman, the civilian public's disconnect with the military is already huge. The Veterans of Foreign Wars ask for your help to not allow the military to exacerbate its own disconnect with their own service members, their veterans, and their retirees. Those who serve our nation in uniform deserve so much better. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Mr. Sterner, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Tierney, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging my wife, Pam, who in 2004 authored the Stolen Valor Act. I'd also like to pay tribute to Chuck Shontag, a Vietnam War Marine, Purple Heart recipient who passed away unexpectedly last Thursday. He and his wife, Mary, have been at the forefront of exposing stolen valor for decades. Last week, the United States Supreme Court heard arguments in a case in which a man falsely claimed to be a Medal of Honor recipient. His conviction was overturned by the Ninth Circuit Court that said he was exercising his right of free speech. Such cases are rampant, resulting in great cost to the government. 8 men charged in Seattle cost the VA $1.4 million. None had ever been in combat. 2 had never been in the military. While I hope that the Supreme Court fails to find merit in the decision of the Ninth Circuit Court, I would agree with them on one point. They said, quote, preserving the value of military decorations is unquestionably an appropriate and worthy governmental objective that Congress may achieve through publicizing the names of legitimate recipients, unquote. When George Washington established our award system in 1782, he said the faker should be punished, but he also said, the name and regiment of the person so certified are to be enrolled in the Book of Merit, which will be kept at the orderly office. This was the first call for a database of our awards, but presently there exists no Book of Merit other than a database of Medal of Honor recipients. In 2009, the Dallas Morning Herald reported that 14 of 67 issued Legion of Valor license plates were bogus. They wrote, officials say it's hard to actually verify an individual's claim even with documents. Without a database, we're hamstrung. Well, I could detail cases of stolen valor for hours. It would become redundant, but there's another point I want to make, and that is the way our real heroes are being robbed on a daily basis, and it's for lack of proper record keeping by our government. 12 years ago, after watching Saving Private Ryan, Monty McDaniel decided to research his uncle who was killed in the Normandy invasion. And he found that his uncle may have been awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, but there was no record of that in the family. He searched and he found the evidence, not only of his uncle, but the man whose citation followed him, killed in action, and his family did not know of that award. In 2001, both of these heroes were finally awarded their posthumous Distinguished Service Crosses. The parents of both men died in the 1990s, never knowing of the great heroism and award of their dead sons. In 2007, I received an email from Jan Garanda, whose father was one of fewer than 4,000 recipients of the Navy Cross in World War II. By the way, Jan flew in all the way from Kansas yesterday to be here. This is that important to her. Jan was trying to get her father buried at Arlington, but the Navy, for its part, couldn't even find a record that he had served on active duty. She emailed me, I verified the award, and she notes, 6 days later I was informed that Arlington had ordered my father's marker. Made my week, because that's what this is about. The closest thing to any kind of database that the Army has is an enumeration of awards, no names, published by Army Human Resources Command. They show that 848 Distinguished Service Crosses were awarded in the Vietnam War. The Military Times Hall of Valor has the citations for 1,068. That's 220 of the most decorated heroes of the war I served in that are otherwise lost to history. The problems of lost heroes, it hasn't improved with technology. The Baltimore Sun reported, quote, the Army denied a March 2006 Freedom of Information Act request for narratives of Silver Stars, first on the grounds that it could not find them all. In fact, I personally FOIA'd for the Silver Stars awarded to 24 men killed in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I'll tell you, Scott does a great job, but he can only send me what he's got. 22 of those 24 came back from St. Louis. No record of that GWAT veteran getting the Silver Star. I hope to demonstrate to you today that a database of awards is an achievable goal, and a worthy one, not only to serve as a tool to thwart acts of stolen valor and fraud against our government, but as a noble effort to preserve for posterity the great service, sacrifice, and valor of America's veterans. We owe them much, and the very least we owe them is to keep an accurate record of their deeds. As Medal of Honor recipient William A. Jones wrote shortly before his death in 1969, poor is a nation that has no heroes, but beggared that nation that has and forgets them. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. We're now going to move to questioning. I'm going to recognize myself for 5 minutes. You've heard Mr. Davis and Mr. Sterner, you 5 gentlemen. I have no doubt about your patriotism, your commitment to your job, your country, or anything else. I heard you all give testimony about where we are today, but I didn't hear a whole lot about what we really should be doing. Because my guess is, in your heart of hearts and in your expertise, you know what's wrong with the system. This committee wants to know what's wrong, what should be fixed, and what should we do about it. So any of the 5 of you could respond to Mr. Davis and Mr. Sterner, I'd appreciate it. Mr. Hebert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admittedly, any system as massive as the Department of Defense's personnel systems requires constant and vigilant improvement. Such improvement was made in 2002 when we introduced the accessible database through the Defense Personnel Records Information Retrieval System. Imagine, as a veteran, I myself, in preparation for this hearing, went to the VA website, logged on, and within a matter of minutes was presented with an email back in my account that my records were available. Now, by trade, I was in the personnel community when I was in uniform. So I was pretty familiar with my own personnel records. Well, surprising to me that I had 138 pages of documents, some of which I had never seen before, that were filed and digitized and immediately accessible to me as a veteran.
Okay, so are you advocating that we have one database?
I'm advocating that we've advanced beyond the structure of a single database.
So you're advocating that we have multiple databases?
I'm advocating that the system we have in place now has inherent advantages over a single database. Let me explain. Any database itself has to reference a source document or a source record. So if you create a redundancy within your system, your database is only as accurate as your last refresh, the last time you went back and sought to update your records. What the Department has created instead is a single portal that reaches back to the individual service source records so that it immediately, there is no redundancy, there is no update or refresh time. It's accessing the same record that the personnel clerk would within the service.
I got to cut you off here a little bit. If we can go to that first slide, I want to show you this. This is the form that you're supposed to fill out. I don't know if there's a way to get to the bottom part of that. Maybe it's slide number 2. But if you can look, there you go. There you go. You're having a hard time seeing that on the monitor here. But what that says is this is the address list of custodians. Essentially, there are 14 different areas in which you can go. You have to kind of do this chart and figure out, connect the numbers and then go figure out where. It seems like a very convoluted way of doing things.
Yes, sir.
And the inaccuracy or incomplete nature of these records is what's so troublesome. So let's take for a moment that I'm some company out there in Idaho. And so I have somebody come to me and say, well, I want to, they're applying for a job. And being a patriotic employer, all things being equal, I want to hire the veteran. Even though he may be disabled, maybe earned a Purple Heart, maybe earned another, I'm thinking, you know what, I want to hire that person. How do I, as an employer, verify that he's telling the truth? I mean, I want to believe that everybody's telling the truth, but the reality is, unfortunately, they're not. Yes, so it goes back to the Reagan mantra of trust but verify.
Yes, sir.
What do I do?
Sir, you've hit upon the one area you were asking where the system could be improved. In preparation for this hearing, my panelists and I all did extensive research, and one of the areas we found we were lacking in, or one of the gaps, if you will, is that we don't display in a layman's simple format how you access these records if you're not a veteran. If you're a veteran, going to the VA website, it's very intuitive, that sort of thing. But if you're an employer, how do you, without knowledge of the Department of Defense, without knowledge of our internal systems, how do you get to it? Clearly, that's an area that we are lacking, and we're, as a department, are going to move forward on making sure that there is a very clear, single point of entry that delineates exactly how you access records, whether the individual is a veteran or a former veteran or a currently serving member, or whether the individual, regardless of service, that you can come to this one-stop shop, if you will, to gain access to these records.
My time's expired here, but very quickly, Mr. Levins, a few more stats, if you will. How many, I know you don't take appropriations, but how much money is flowing in and out of your organization? How many personnel do you have in place to execute your mission and what you're doing at your offices there? Thank you.
We've got about 900 employees in St. Louis, but about half of them are student temps, part-time employees, and many of them work on issues involving the civilian facility, not the military facility. To store the records in the appropriate environment, the military records, and to provide reference service on them is about a $50 million a year program.
Thank you. In the essence of time here, will now recognize Ranking Member Tierney for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Hebert, let me ask you this. Have you used the services, any of the services as well, used outside advice or counsel from people in private industry who might be involved with databases and computer systems, whatever, and sought their input into how you might better do your jobs?
No, I have not, sir.
Colonel?
Sir, not that I'm aware of.
Colonel?
Sir, in the development of the database systems that we do presently use, that was done with the assistance of advisors, subject matter experts on building databases.
Mr. Neal?
Yes, Mr. Attorney. In the same way, in the development of our current systems, the improved awards processing system for the Marine Corps, which is a completely paperless system which came online in 2001 and is still in use, I mean, that is a contracted out. We also in the Navy have the Navy Department Awards Web Service, which is another database, and of course we've got people under contract continually improve. We continually improve those systems.
Do the five of you, from Mr. Hebert to Mr. Levins, all join in the contention that having service-based systems are better than having one system, individual processes in each department or each service? Mr. Hebert, we know you already. You think that's a good idea. Colonel Evans?
Yes, sir. I think that the database we currently have now and the ability of the Defense Records Information Retrieval System that NPRC uses, the National Personnel Record System, is sufficient, sir.
Colonel Mostert?
Yes, sir. The record system that we have serves our needs, and with DPRIS, we are able to provide information that is accessible outside of us. So that is the entry point for outside agencies to access our information as well as the other information.
Mr. Neal?
Yes, Mr. Attorney, I do agree. Our systems were developed with specifically for the way our forces are deployed around the world, the command structures that we employ within our services, and I think that they do work better as separate systems because they are complete systems and not simply record keeping and database for lookups.
Mr. Levins, do you think that should change, or do you think it's fine the way it is?
I could only hazard a guess at how complex it might be to merge all the different systems together, but DoD has had great success in DPRIS, which is a portal which will speak to each of those systems. Where I think the benefit could come from is from revisiting the issue of one-stop shopping for veterans records. Right now, our technicians are credentialed to use DPRIS, and they're proficient at using DPRIS to access Army records, but they can't use the system to access the records of the other service departments. So when a potential employer writes to us for employment verification of a modern veteran who just got out of the Air Force, for example, we can't respond to that request if we don't have the record. We have to refer that to the Air Force. So I think that DPRIS could be further leveraged to create that one-stop shop. I think DPRIS provides great benefits to the veteran himself because there's an opportunity for self-service. But when it comes to third parties like potential employers, there's a lot of personal data in those records, and not all of that personal data pertains to the veteran. It often pertains to other members of the military, and it's not releasable. So that needs to be carefully thought about as well. The character of service is not something that's releasable under the Freedom of Information Act.
Who would be responsible for taking the lead in making those kinds of changes, Mr. Levins?
Department of Defense, I would imagine.
So, Mr. Hebert, would that fall on you, or are we missing somebody here?
We're missing somebody here, sir. Basically, it's an individual service responsibility. They are under statute required to organize, train, and equip. This is part of that function, the record-keeping function of the personnel records. Personnel records being much more than just a reporting of history. It is an integral part of how individuals are developed, assigned, and processed throughout their career.
So who would we need at the table to try to look at and evaluate the recommendations that Mr. Levins just made?
I will take it, sir, for action to go back and meet with the services to discuss this further to determine whether or not there's viability in adopting an Army model, if you will, for the other services.
I wonder, we have the whole Joint Chiefs of Staff thing going on here. It doesn't seem to be working all that well in terms of coordination, does it? Mr. Davis, Mr. Stern, if I heard each of you correct, or correct me if I'm wrong, I should say, you each thought that it would be important to have a list of medal recipients that was, so you could at any given time say a particular medal and who's received it, when, and particulars about it. Was that one of the points that you raised, Mr. Sterner?
That's my hot button, is the awards. I think that's so critical. On the other hand, what the Chairman has referenced, what you're talking about, a database for immediately vetting whether or not someone is a veteran who qualifies for a veteran's preference, I'd like to point to a 2004 study that was done by NPRC looking into the feasibility of digitizing awards. In that study, they found that it would be impractical to digitize everything, but reading from the executive summary from that, digitizing the key military separation document, the DD-214, that's what you're looking for, Mr. Chairman, in every post-1947 file will yield a $4 million annual return on an $11.9 million investment. There's your database done by NARA. The problem with it is, of course, it's going to be incomplete because of the 1973 fire. The awards database that I'm calling for would fill in many of those gaps, and it would be a very, very complete system. And, of course, with the system that we have now in place, merging it all together would give you what you want, and it would also give us that awards database.
Thank you.
I recognize Mr. Braley for 5 minutes.
I want to thank the Chairman, and I want to apologize for our distinguished panelists. I was actually at Walter Reed this morning talking to a young Marine from my district who had both of his legs blown off in Afghanistan and is back for revision surgery. And that and another event that's coming up in 10 days, which has been on my bucket list for a long time, have really put this whole hearing in perspective for me. Mr. Sterne, you mentioned Saving Private Ryan in your opening remarks, and the fictional character of Private Ryan was from Peyton, Iowa. I live in Waterloo, Iowa, where the 5 Sullivan brothers grew up. These are not abstract principles to us. And in fact, when Ken Burns came out with his classic documentary on World War II, I called him the next day because he inaccurately described their hometown as being Clarksville, Iowa. And I am going to be going in 10 days to Iwo Jima with a World War II veteran from Waterloo who landed there with my father the day that they raised both flags on Mount Suribachi. My dad has been gone for 31 years, and it was only through accessing his records at the National Personnel Records Center that I was able to start to piece the story of his military history together for me and my family. And yet, it's amazing, as I've prepared for this trip, I've also been researching a guy I knew in my tiny hometown of Brooklyn, Iowa, named Harold Keller, who was the 2nd Marine to reach the summit of Mount Suribachi and is in the famous gung-ho flag-raising photograph taken that day. And he slept under the flag that night. And I have been accessing databases for people interested in that battle, and you would be amazed at the number of people who claim to be in that photograph when in Jim Bradley's book, everybody is identified but 2 people.
And this underscores the nature and extent of the problem we're having. If we have 90-year-old veterans to whom being in that photograph is so important that they are claiming to be in it, and there are many people claiming to be in it, then how do we protect people who are trying to preserve the integrity of sacrifice that these veterans have made when so many people are out there on eBay buying medals, buying citations, because we desperately want to have some association with this valor? How do we get to the underlying problem of the demand for recognition that is causing all this problem? Mr. Davis, Mr. Sterner?
Sir, I think one of the initial issues is basically verification needs to be easy. And that's why a central database, it's searchable, it's easy to access by anybody with an internet. Look it up at the library, whatever. But, you know, what we're hearing here a little bit is turf wars, obviously, because people like to protect what they own right now. But in the current state of the economy, stuff merges. I mean, look at the commissary system. There's only one commissary system in the military now. There's only one accounting system in the military now. There's talk now on the Hill to merge the exchange systems, and right now they're looking at possibly one medical command instead of 3 separate in the Army, Navy, and the Air Force. This might be something, I know this may not be the format to talk about this, but, you know, one human resources command entity under DOD or wherever, there's a possibility. But having a database that's easy, that's searchable, it's absolutely vital to this issue, because regardless of what happens with the Supreme Court, this issue is going to remain.
Well, and on the form that Mr. Chaffetz put up earlier, which is a form that is newer than the one I used to access my father's records, Mr. Chairman, I believe there were at least 3 options on there. If you were looking for a Marine Corps veteran's records, you would have no idea which of those options to select unless you had more sophisticated knowledge than is included on the form itself. So if ease of access and yet integrity of access are the things we're trying to preserve, I don't understand how that form gets us there. Mr. Sterner?
Congressman Braley, first of all, Kelly Loughren Sullivan of Waterloo, Iowa, the only surviving granddaughter of the 5 Sullivan brothers, is a good friend, and she would love to hear your comments today. And also with reference to Mr. Harold Keller, what most people don't realize, what many congressional staffers don't understand, there are approximately 350 large boxes at the Navy Yard here in Washington, D.C., with 3x5 index cards. I go there every Friday, and I copy about 1,000 of them and take them back to my office and type them up. It's data entry. It's not rocket science. I've estimated 12 data entry people in 1 year could type all those into a database. For that cost, we have all the awards to members of the United States Marine Corps, Coast Guard, and Navy from inception of our award system to present. It's vetted. It's from original source documents. I can type them quicker than you can OCR them because they're brief, so it's accurate. And so it would be a very simple matter to do this. As to accuracy, DOD in their report in 2009 said that in order to be functional, a database must be 95% complete. I would challenge the Department of Defense to audit the database that Military Times currently has with 13,500 DSC recipients, 7,000 Navy Cross recipients, 194 Air Force Cross recipients, and fewer than 3,500 Medals of Honor, and find that our database is not 99% complete. If we can do it with that, we've proved we can do it with the Silver Star, and we can do it with the other awards. You know, the chairman of the full committee mentioned Dwight Eisenhower. We don't just focus on Valor Awards. If we didn't include the Distinguished Service Medal, General Dwight Eisenhower would not be in the Hall of Valor. And so I think it's important that we remember all of these awards.
Thank you. I'll yield back.
Thank you. It was fascinating to me. I sent a request to Secretary Panetta's office asking that they send one person to provide us information. They sent us 4, and I appreciate the gentlemen that are here. But I got to tell you, we are fundamentally failing to fulfill this mission. And the Pentagon is very mission-oriented. But this is going on far too long. Now, some of your testimonies said that you get very few inquiries. I would be led to, if I just read your testimony or heard your testimony, that everything's fine. It's not fine. It's not working. Let me give you an example, Colonel Mostert. I had a situation where somebody presented some documentation. And it was Mr. Sterner that pointed out it was probably false. My communication, the way I'm supposed to do it through the legislative liaison, National Personnel Record Center, first sentence back on August 3rd when they responded to me. The record needed to answer your inquiry is not in our files. Then that wasn't good enough, so I went back again from the Department of Air Force, September 12th, unable to verify. Got another letter from November 29th from the Department of Air Force. It appears his record is lost in transit. I went back again. Finally, on December 28th, the Department of Air Force said the documentation was not authentic. Now, look, as a sitting member of Congress with my own legislative liaison, that's the kind of response that we get. I can only imagine what some employer in Florida or pick any state you are, trying to go through this process. And Mr. Hebert, with all due respect, I don't believe that our own military can go through this process sufficiently and find the answers that they want about their family and about their own records. When I had an opportunity to talk to Secretary Gates, I wanted to know about the military record of a injured service member who was being discharged and the transfer of his records from the military to the Veterans Department. It was taking over a year, and the Secretary said, yeah, that's about right. That is totally unacceptable. These gentlemen here, Mr. Davis and Mr. Sterner, are calling for what I think is entirely reasonable, which is a database where people can verify the medals that they've earned. There is sensitivity to a lot of the personnel record that nobody should have other access to other than maybe the service member and their spouse. I understand that. Why can't we create a database of people and what medals they've earned so that it can be verified? And to hear the four of you, and include Mr. Levins, the five of you, you're good with the way it is. I think it's totally unacceptable. Again, explain to me. Let's start. I want to start, Mr. Neal. Let's start with you. What is wrong with what Mr. Davis and Mr. Sterner are saying? Why wouldn't we have one database?
Mr. Chairman, in terms of the current, to answer the question about or to address your comment about the current person, the current veteran or recently discharged veteran, those individuals can go online and can access our systems to find out what awards they're entitled to. It's when you get into the person who's been discharged prior to the electronic uploading of the systems that might be more involved. The comments that have been made do understate the problem. Throughout history, as I mentioned in my statement, the methods of record keeping have evolved. There are different forms, different media being used in history.
Yep.
The volume of the number of awards, really, as Mr. Sterner just said, you won't stop at this award and that award. And so effectively we're talking about, or potentially, going back in history and trying to record all awards that were ever awarded, and that is
isn't that worth doing?
That is an immense. I won't address.
It's hard for me to believe that we're in 2012 and there's still some question as to whether or not we would do that. Are you advocating that we not do that?
As we have said, in a perfect world, for example, he addressed the cards that are on file at the Navy Yard. They are imaged as well. We have them on microfilm and we search them routinely to type in all of those cards. To have those in a database readily available would be of some benefit. The question would be, is the cost worth that benefit?
Well, we in the United States Congress, we are, per legislation and directive, we routinely award what would amount to billions of dollars in contracts and preferences to people for their military service. We have employers from coast to coast all the time who are wanting to employ people who have achieved these medals. And it's not some guy in a bar trying to impress a woman that I'm worried about. This is a serious problem where you're talking about billions of dollars and the integrity of those who truly did earn their awards. My time has expired. Mr. Davis, Mr. Sterner, do you care to comment?
Is the 1973 fire. Everybody gets the fire letter. The military is redundant in paperwork, if nothing else. What I have been calling for is digitizing the index cards at the Navy Yard. I said 14 data entry people 1 year. That's less than $1 million to have a complete database. We could do all of the Purple Heart cards for the Navy and Marine Corps with probably 4 data entry people in 1 year. But the problem is with the Army, because it was the Army and the Army Air Forces and U.S. Air Force records that burned in the fire. This is one volume of 2 that has the general orders for the 63rd Infantry Division in World War II. The sticky notes are the missing general orders. The Army, in their DOD report, talked about how many orders were lost. Well, there's 5 missing general orders that I haven't found. I'm sure we can find them. These contain the citations for every member of that division. There were approximately 100 divisions in World War II that got any award under general orders. 8,000 awards. To have a complete record of every award, down to the Bronze Star and the Air Medals for this division, would be as difficult as typing up 2 of these books. Now, I'm going to tell you, I have gone through these, both volumes, and I've typed up every Silver Star. And every time I do that, I skip through 10 pages of Bronze Stars, detailing the heroism of American soldiers in World War II. And I skip over that. Why? Because the Bronze Star isn't important? Heck no. Because I just simply don't have the time and resources. I have to limit it to the Silver Star and above. Hey, it's there. If you FOIA the men that are in this book, 90% of them will come back from Scott saying, we're sorry, the record burned in the fire. But you open the book and you read the Bronze Star, and there's his name, his service number, his unit, his military specialty. If he's an infantryman, that means he qualifies for a CIB now that we've vetted that would lost to history. His theater of action, now you know his campaign ribbons. The date he was in action, it may say as he was attacking the machine gun nest he was wounded. Now we have evidence of a lost Purple Heart. And at the very end, it has his hometown and home state. So you guys can remember locally your own local heroes. Why don't we do it? It's data entry.
Go ahead, Mr. Davis.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to be, I'm very, very grateful that there is at least one person and his wife with limited manpower, limited resources, who want to do this, who want to make a difference, to make it this correction, because the services, they just want to take care of their own, but they can't because they don't. You go onto the Army website and all the services list their Medal of Honor recipients. Marine Corps are on the Navy website. But from that down to the cross recipients and Silver Star is not there. I mean, you have press releases for external consumption. You have internal press releases for base newspapers around the country. But there's no accounting of all these. You go into the Air Force's Air University, they have a list of Air Force cross recipients, but just for the enlisted folks who got it. You go to the Army War College, and they got a listing of Army Medal of Honor recipients, but their database comes from the Congressional Medal of Honor Society, which is a 501c3 nonprofit. The military services have to want to do it like Doug and Pam Sterner want to do it.
Thank you. My time is well expired here. I now recognize Mr. Platts for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to thank you and the ranking member and your staffs for your focus on this very important issue and helping to ensure that we properly honor those who have served and don't allow others to wrongfully and just terribly, dishonorably try to use the service of others to their own benefit. I apologize. I've got a HASC hearing going on at the same time and constituents waiting for me. So I don't have any questions other than to express thanks to all of you for your individual efforts and collective efforts of trying to help us rectify the problem and to go forward in a positive way to make sure we do better in the future as a government and as a nation. And I think probably one of the things I think it's important here to emphasize is this isn't just about preventing individuals from wrongfully claiming veteran status or especially heroic status of those who have served us in harm's way, but it's also about protecting those who have served us because we know that when individuals wrongly get the benefit, it takes money away from those who have properly and heroically earned the benefit, and especially in difficult financial times as we're in today, where every dollar counts. When we have people fraudulently benefiting from claiming veteran status and especially status of service in harm's way, that means we're not doing as much as we could for those who are truly deserving of that assistance from our nation that they've really have earned through their heroic actions. So I thank each of you and appreciate the written testimony because, as I think probably has been expressed here, as all members are trying to be in 5 places at once and not able to hear your oral testimony, having your written testimony. And Mr. Chairman, to you and the ranking member, certainly offer my assistance in working with you and the committee in any way I can to better properly identify and maintain a good database. And I think in your memorandum where you highlight George Washington's quote of, throughout our nation's history, this is an issue that we've sought to address, and hopefully we can do better going forward. And with your leadership, I'm certain we will. So with that, I yield back and again say thanks to all of our witnesses.
Thank you. Now I recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Tierney, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Well, I won't use 5 minutes. Colonel Evans, Colonel Mostert, and Mr. Neal, I have no doubt that you do a good job at what you do, and I want to thank you for that. But I don't think that we should burden you with the notion that you're setting policy on this issue. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't necessarily think you're thinking of the overall policy for the Department of Defense with respect to this record keeping. And I just would like to have our staffs work together with the Chairman's staff to identify with Mr. Hebert and Mr. Levins who would be dealing with the policy on this issue, because it needs to be revisited and we need to see a cost-benefit analysis laid out with some specificity. The Department of Defense, for all the good that it does to us in our national security, is the one agency that can't pass an audit on this, which gives us real reason to pause about whether or not we are doing things efficiently and appropriately. And with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, as I mentioned earlier, so many things were supposed to have been done efficiently and appropriately in terms of consolidation. And as Mr. Davis said, this may be one area that we should look at, is why we have all of the different services doing this independently and differently. Certainly doesn't make us feel comfortable up here that it's being done the best way that it could be. So if Mr. Hebert and Mr. Levins, if you would just commit to working with the staffs on that, and maybe we can identify those people that are setting policy who can come before the committee and the Chairman, if you might be interested in doing that, to find out what the policy is, to revisit what it ought to be, and look at the cost-benefit analysis of that, and maybe we can get some answers for not just Mr. Davis and Mr. Sterner, but for all of us. Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you. I think it is worth revisiting this March 2009 report. It's a report to the Senate and House Armed Services Committees on a Searchable Military Valor Decorations Database. In this report, one of the extracts here was a quote: "The more centralized the award authority, the more likely the applicable military department is to have a more accurate record of the awards. Whereas the opposite correlation is also true. The more decentralized the award authority, the less likely the applicable military department is to have an accurate award, an accurate record." It goes on to say, quote, "The Defense Manpower Data Center estimates the cost of establishing a publicly accessible database of Valor Award recipients is $250,000. The database would include public access via the World Wide Web." I really do believe, with the hundreds of billions of dollars that are allocated to the Department of Defense, if there was a will, the Department of Defense would find the way to do it. I think this is a lack of leadership within the Pentagon. I'm not pointing to a Democrat or Republican. I'm just saying the highest levels of the Department of Defense have to make this a priority or it won't happen. The gentleman sitting here today, I appreciate your service. You're doing what you're asked to do. I'm not here blaming you individually, but collectively, the Department of Defense is failing. They failed to recognize the problem, they have failed to recognize the need, and they have never put forward a plan to solve this problem. I can tell you, as long as the people of Utah put me in this position, I will push the Department of Defense to do this. There's $250,000 in there somehow, somewhere, to get this done. We will hold hearing after hearing if need be, but this is something that our nation cares about. People are being ripped off. They're being scammed. And we owe it to the men and women who earned these awards to make sure that there is a way to verify and recognize those people who truly did earn those awards. So I know, I speak for members on both sides of this aisle, this Congress will be committed to making this happen. I appreciate your dedication. I cannot thank Mr. Davis, Mr. Sterner enough. I thank the family that came here. And for those people who have gone through this nightmare of having their valor questioned, the people who have overstated it, I think we as a Congress have to have a commitment. I'm committed to it, and I hope that sooner rather than later the Department of Defense is committed to it. This hearing is now concluded, and we appreciate your service. Thank you.